Christ is risen. Cool, you sound really excited about that. Tough audience today. Okay, well, at least I know what I'm working with, so that's good. What does Easter mean to you? What does that saying, Christ is risen, he is risen indeed, actually mean? Is it just something that we say to greet each other on Easter Day? Is it? Well, this morning my hope is that you will leave here with a fresh sense of excitement about what that means, the fact that Christ is risen. I want you to be excited about what it means to you now, what it means to your future. But I think this morning I also want to particularly remind us of why this is such good news to everyone. Another question for you. You're going to have to participate a little bit this morning. For those of you who have been around church for a little while, what is your favorite part of the Easter story? Or maybe one verse or story that sums up everything that happens on, in the whole story. The fact that he's risen. John 3:16. And 17, yeah, 17. It's part of the Easter story, that's cool. When Mary came to the tomb, where she didn't recognize him because she thought he was the gardener. Sorry, that's okay. I know. I love that story because it's all about me. I'm sorry, my surname is Gardiner, so that's yes. Anyway, but yes, the fact that he called her name and spoke her name. I want to get onto that because I do think that's one of the most significant parts of the story for a few reasons. Was it the fact for you that the first people to find Jesus and tell the story that he had risen from the dead were women? I'm pretty excited by that. I think that's an incredible part of our Bible. That I think a lot of you know, but women were not trusted in quite the same way. They had to be verified by men. Oh my word! I do. Julie will tell you. I think I'm a far bigger feminist than Julie is. I really struggle with things like that. But the very fact that God chose the women to reveal first himself, but also to be the first evangelists, and men have been trying to shut them up again ever since, which I think is, anyway, don't get me started on that. That's not the message today. Was it the race between Peter and John that gets the story? I actually like the fact that I love the way that John says, the one that he loved, that Jesus loved most. It's kind of like, I don't know. I think there's no, it doesn't matter about that either. But I think that story, that rivalry or that connection between Peter and John, of who could get to the tomb first. I think there's a lot in that as well. You could preach a whole message on that. In fact, I've heard a message on that. Was it the angels at the tomb saying to all intents and purposes, "Duh, why are you here? Have you not seen? What on earth are you doing here? Didn't he tell you?" Was it the fact that no one recognized Jesus in his resurrected body until he revealed himself, first of all, to Mary, but also on the road to Emmaus and in other settings as well? Was it the way in the story that Jesus restored Peter after Peter denied him 3 times? One of the first things he does is to restore that relationship. I think that's a hugely significant thing. And I think actually that, in some ways, encapsulates what Jesus did on the cross. The fact that the first thing he wanted to do was to restore broken relationship. It's a little hint of what's coming. Was it the fact that Jesus fished, cooked, and ate with his disciples? Even in his resurrected body, he was able to eat. Now, I am really glad that none of you said that your favorite part of the Easter story was when the Easter bunny comes to bring chocolate. That was pretty good. Thank you all for not doing that one. But do you think there is one verse or story that sums up everything that happened? Well, for me, I think it's probably a little passage. It really is just a sentence in there, in the story, that describes what happened the very moment that Jesus died. I'm going to read it to you. And it comes from Matthew 27. And it says this: At that moment, the temple curtain was ripped in two, top to bottom. There was an earthquake, and rocks were split in pieces. What's more, tombs were opened up, and many bodies of believers asleep in their graves were raised. After Jesus' resurrection, they left the tombs, entered the holy city, and appeared to many. So this morning, there are two things in that little passage that I want us to just consider a little bit. Firstly, was the immense and incredible power that was released that day. I mean, an earthquake is pretty significant, but we know now, certainly as Christians in our faith, that it actually changed everything. I mean, it for bodies to be resurrected, that impacted, well, it impacted time because it went back in time, and so it impacted the natural laws of the earth and the world and the way things were. But even that, an earthquake could not rip a curtain. Now, when you're thinking of the word curtain, I don't know whether you're like me, but you're thinking of what's at home that you can pull a little drawstring and it kind of like does that, or with your hands, or in, whatever it is. But the curtain the history books say that the curtain that we're talking about that was torn was not that kind of curtain. It was apparently woven, and it had motifs of the cherubs and cherubim on them, and the thickness of it was of a fist. It was 3.5 inches or 90 centimeters. So you're talking about that thick. Millimeters. Did I say centimeters? Millimeters. Okay. So about that thick. Now, cloth would not be torn, if you think about it. If it was hanging on something, it would not be torn from top to bottom in an earthquake. It wouldn't actually be torn in an earthquake. It would have to be fixed at like both ends and be somehow, it might drop down, or the things that were supporting it. But this was split. We're going to come back to that in a minute. But can you even imagine the power that was actually happened that day? The thing that changed history, the thing that changed the natural order of life, the thing that had physical consequences, spiritual consequences, that every area was impacted. Now, I don't know about you. Have you ever been near an explosion of any kind? I mean, I've had little things. I mean, I was at the 2020 once, and if a 6 is scored, they put up a flame. And even if you are rows back from that flame, you actually feel the heat of this thing just going, and you're kind of thinking, my word, I'm glad I wasn't standing, there. I mean, that's just a small thing, and that's just like with fire or with heat. I mean, has anybody felt one of the earthquakes in Adelaide, one of the little bits and pieces. No, I haven't, but a few people have. And actually, just before Christmas, there was an electrical storm here in Adelaide. And it really did make your hair stand on end. And there was just something in the atmosphere that was tangible and that you could feel. I also remember going back a few decades, I hate to think how many, but anyway, a few decades. I was in Florida, that's the place. And suddenly I heard this noise and there was this rumbling sound. And it's like many, many, many tens of miles away was Cape Canaveral. And I had no idea, but a rocket was taking off. But I could not believe that I could experience or feel that where I was actually at that time. So the kind of power that was released that day is fairly incredible. I say, you're not just talking about a physical power, you're talking about one that changes history, that changes matter, that changes DNA, that changes absolutely everything in the blink of an eye, happening at that time. Now, I don't know about you, but if you had an explosion go off outside of the building, you wouldn't just sit there kind of like going, oh, that was nice. Well, you might. There would be a reaction from you. And that reaction would be, I would imagine, screaming, running, checking for your loved ones or whatever, what's happened, inquisitive, all of those things. The kind of power that was released that moment that Christ died beat all of that. It affected history. And there's a couple of verses that I think we need to be reminded of. One of them's found in Romans 8:11, and it says this: "The Spirit of God who raised Jesus from the dead lives in you. And just as God raised Christ Jesus from the dead, he will give life to your mortal bodies by this same Spirit living within you." And then again in Ephesians 1, it says, "I also pray that you will understand the incredible greatness of God's power for us who believe him. This is the same mighty power that raised Christ from the dead and seated him in the place of honor at God's right hand in the heavenly realms." That same power, that very same power that caused the curtain to tear, that caused people to be raised from the dead, that caused history to change, that same power is living in you. Now, if that's really true, what difference is it making to you? Or, put it another way, what difference should it be making to you? If there's a real understanding that that same power is living in us, wouldn't we live our lives differently? Possibly even differently to how we're even living them now with that knowledge? If we truly understood that power, if we really grasped what that immense change that was living within us, impacting our worlds, our lives, because of what Jesus did. It's not just a question about living differently. It's a question of everything changes, everything. It impacts everything. Are we really living like that? Just because the event happened, it's like people talk about everything that's happening in the cosmos, in the world, in the galaxies, happens because of an event, a big bang, something, God speaking into matter and it becoming something. So all of the volcanoes, all of the earthquakes that happen today, when did the power from that actually happen? Is it today? Or is the power actually from the event that happened when God spoke and everything happened? Is it new power that's been created? No, it all comes from that event. All the planets that are moving, all the black holes, everything that's happening, all comes from that one event, even though we are living, well, I'm not going to get into a debate as to whether we're talking thousands or millions of years. You work out what you want to about that. But let's just put it this way, a very long time, okay? In the same way, the power that was released on the day that Christ died, we are seeing there is today, everything stems from that one event. All the experiences of God, everything happens because of what Christ did then, at that time. So the first thing I want you to really get and understand is the incredible power from that day that changes everything. What element of the resurrection power of God do you need to see for everything that you're believing for? That power is living within you. That's what the word says. Now, going back to the passage about what happened, that's one part, second part, and then we're done. Going back to the passage about what happened the moment that Jesus died, I skipped over a little bit the part about the temple curtain ripping in two and moved on to the power of the event, but only because I want to focus on that right now. As I said, the curtains, they're not just like normal curtains. These were thick, massive pieces of cloth. Even an earthquake could not have torn it. And many of you will know the significance of the curtain at the temple. The temple was where the Jews believed that the very presence of God dwelt amongst them. And inside the temple was the Ark of the Covenant, and within an area known as the Holy of Holies. And in the second temple, which when Jesus was there, although the Ark wasn't there, there was still a mercy seat. There was still a place that was considered to be the Holy of Holies. And only once a year was anyone allowed into that room. And even then, it was only the high priest. And even then, only after a time of sacrifice, of worship, and ceremonial cleansing. And even then, the high priest had to have a rope tied around them in case God struck them down, because there was an issue. They hadn't cleaned themselves properly, or the sacrifice hadn't been accepted, and they were fearful that they were going to have to be dragged out after God had struck them down dead. There was a lot of nervousness about going into the presence of God. There isn't quite the nervousness of when you walk into church or when you kneel down and pray. I think sometimes there should be, but that's a whole nother matter. But no, seriously, the reverence and what was expected at that time meant that it was the separation from God and man that happened at when Adam and Eve sinned back in the garden was absolutely catastrophic to the relationship between God and humanity. So the significance of the curtain and the fact that it was torn meant that there was no longer a barrier between the most holy presence of God and everything outside of that. All of the artificial barriers that had separated man from God were permanently removed when the curtain was torn in two. So from between the time that Adam and Eve sinned in the garden to the moment that Jesus died, humanity had been separated by sin, from being with God. We're told that they used to walk with God in the garden. Imagine that, being able to walk with God and then suddenly told, or suddenly finding that you were no longer able to have the relationship that you had, not being able to walk. The only way from that moment on that humanity could be in the presence of God was through sacrifice of animals to atone for their sin. However, the moment Jesus died, everything changed. Humanity could walk with God again. So let me ask you a question. Is there anything that God hates more than sin? No? The consequences of it. Well, that's all right, because believe it or not, if you hadn't, I might have done. It's my wife, for those of you who don't know, just making sure she checks my heresy levels. How are we doing this morning, Jules? We're doing all right? If there wasn't something that God hated more than sin, when man did sin, he would have wiped out mankind. If that was his number one priority, he could have got rid of it just like that. His number one hate above sin is broken relationship. It's the lack of intimacy with us. That was the reason that Jesus died. And hear what I say here. Yes, it was to deal with sin, but it was actually the reason he had to deal with sin was because that's what was causing the broken relationship. And that's what he was after. He loved us so much that he would do anything, including taking all of that sin, to restore full relationship with us. Now, again, I want to say this carefully. Julie, I hope you've got your heresy meter on. Good. But when God looks at humanity, sin, I'm talking about now, sin is not an issue. The reason it's not an issue is because he's dealt with it. He's completely dealt with it. The reason he hates it is actually because of what it does to us and because of the fact that it breaks our relationship with him and with each other. That's his issue with sin. The Bible tells us that when we were created, we didn't even know what sin was because it was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil that we were offered, or we weren't offered, we were told not to eat from. So did it mean that Adam and Eve didn't sin before the fall? Or was it that they just didn't know that they had? That's just a little side one. That's a little freebie to make you think. Was there no sin, or was it just a knowledge of sin? Okay, stop thinking about that. The revelation that personally God is giving to me more and more about the Easter message is actually not about sin, however important sin is to the story. And believe it or not, I actually like sin. because if I didn't, I wouldn't keep doing it. Would I? That's the thing about sin. It's attractive. We do it because it feeds something within us. We like it. We like to sin. The reason I love the Easter story and the fact that the separation between God and humanity is no longer there. That's what the good news is. When God looks at me, he no longer grieves because he is separated from me due to my sin. No, now he can walk with me, and together we can then work out the things that he feels are important in my life. He is primarily desperate for relationship. We really can go to him in our rags and our bad attitudes and everything that's going on in our lives and walk with him even in that state. Finally, I've been thinking about how we treat foreigners here in Australia or indeed around the world. We're nervous when people don't talk like us, don't dress like us, don't smell like us, eat like us, behave like us. And honestly, let's be truthful. We want them to change and be like us because we do things the right way. I think we sometimes, I think it's more than that. I think we do the same in the church. We want people to believe what we believe because often we don't like to be challenged. But the good news this morning is that God does not think or act like that. He looks at us, at every one of us, whoever we are, whatever our background, whatever we have done, even the secret stuff, and he doesn't care about it. Well, he does, but not in the way that we do. You see, because we see it as a problem, but to him it's not. It's already dealt with. The thing that he hates, though, is the separation and the separation it causes. I believe that God is lonely without you. Now, yes, he has me, but however much I think that's great for him, he's not satisfied with that. He wants you too. He wants the drug addict we see on the street. He wants the politician who wields power, the person who is considering abortion or has had an abortion, the sick, the confident, the proud, the humble. And he wants to say, come as you are, just as you are. Don't worry about how you look or you smell or what you've done. We can work on that. I want you. I'm lonely without you. As Christians, I believe that that's what he wants our priority to be. It's to tell people the good news, not to point out the issues. People on the whole know the issues that they've got. They don't want to be told about them. They want to be told the good news that they can walk with God, that there is no hindrance at all to being able to walk with God and to be in the presence of God. Yes, the things need to be dealt with that are in our lives, but they are a hindrance. But I think we've got the wrong end of the stick. We often as Christians focus on the sin rather than focusing on the relationship. And Jesus, all the way through the Gospels, all the way, the immediate thing that he did was to restore relationship, was actually to turn to Mary and say her name, was to allow Thomas to touch the wounds in his hands, to actually cook, to eat with people. It was a relationship he was after. That's exactly what he is after today. That's exactly what he wants the message to be, of what he did on Easter Sunday. So, a friend of mine wrote a poem this week when he was considering the torn curtain. And it's actually the pastor of Darwin Baptist, a guy called Mel Circum, and he wrote this week. And he says this: "He bids me to come and peek inside the curtain torn. A sacred space for me, exclusions gone, with barriers removed, unwelcomed home. He bids me come. He bids me come, and humbly coming, I confess my flaws, my guilt, my shame, my unworthiness, while he bestows on me white robes of righteousness. He bids me come. He bids me come, and undeserving bids me stand in confidence before the mercy seat. Upon my shoulder, his accepting hand, he bids me come. He bids me come and boldly stand, his presence not to fear, redeemed, forgiven, cleansed. I'm accepted here. And so he bids me come. He bids me come, his wounded form, beyond our recognition, declared my path to the most holy place. His blood, the sacred price of my admission. Again, today, he bids me come. He bids us come. Let's stand. I have a slightly different benediction for you today. Anyway, you'll like it. I'm telling you too. May God bless you with discomfort at easy answers, half-truths, and superficial relationships, so that you may live deep within your heart. May God bless you with anger at injustice, oppression, the exploitation of people, so that you may work for justice, freedom, and peace. May God bless you with tears to shed for those who suffer from pain, rejection, starvation, and war, so that you may reach out your hand to comfort them and to turn their pain into joy. And may God bless you with enough foolishness to believe that you can make a difference in this world, so that you can do what others claim cannot be done. Amen.